There are 5 different types of sacrifices in the Bible, and we want to make sure that we understand that they are not all sin sacrifices, because if we apply the understanding of sin sacrifice to all of those sacrifices, then we are going to misunderstand what the Bible is talking about. And one of the ways in which I think is a good example of this type of situation would be like baseball and cricket. If we were to apply the rules of baseball to cricket, because we see that they both have balls and bats and runners and catchers, those types of things, if we apply the rules of baseball to cricket, we are going to be playing it wrong, and we are not going to be playing it correctly, and we will not enjoy the game as it was designed to be enjoyed. The same type of situation happens in the Bible. If we apply the idea of sin sacrifice to all of this other sacrifices, we miss what the Bible is trying to communicate to us. And one of the ways in which that can happen would be in this particular section here in 2 Samuel. So if you take a look right up here, it says 2 Samuel 24:22. This is the section where David had taken a census, and he had chosen to fall into the hands of Yahweh instead of the hands of his enemies, because Yahweh was upset that he had taken the census, because it indicates that David is not trusting God, that he is pursuing the strength of his army as the source of his power instead of Yahweh as the protector of Israel. And so this plague came on Israel, and God has stopped the plague before the Israel was destroyed. 70,000 men died, 70,000 probably being a number of perfect judgment, because 70 can represent the entire nation of Israel, because 70 people came down in total for when they came down to see Joseph in Egypt, and 1,000 meaning a number to perfection type of a thing. That's why you get the millennial kingdom, which is 1,000 years. So 70,000 being this number that symbolizes perfect judgment by God. And so God had told the angel to stop. And then God sends Gad, the prophet, to David and says, come up here to the mountain, which is the intersection of heaven and earth, which is the reason why we find out that the angel of the Lord is in the heavens, in between heaven and earth, resting there at that intersection. And David is told to go offer a sacrifice. And so if you hear sin sacrifice, then you may not be understanding correctly what is going on here, because he is told to offer a burnt offering and a fellowship offering or a peace offering. And these have different ideas than sin. That is not that this is going to atone for a sin, but this is about fellowship with God, a restoration, eating a meal with God. So if we come down here to the red, I don't want to offer to Yahweh burnt offerings that cost me nothing. And this is what Oral Roberts was pointing out too, was saying that when we plant a seed, it's got to cost us something. And what I was saying in the last video was that it was not David's sacrifice that ended the plague. It was God's mercy that had ended the plague. And the reason why the plague was ended, because of the prayer that David had prayed at the beginning of the interaction, was basically, let me fall into Yahweh's hands. Because Yahweh is merciful. This is my prayer, that Yahweh would be merciful. And so then we will continue here. So David bought the threshing floor and the cattle for 50 shekels of silver. David built an altar to Yahweh there, and he offered burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Then Yahweh responded to his prayer for the land and brought the plague to a halt upon Israel. And what I was saying is that the plague had already been halted up here in the purple. Yahweh regretted the evil, and he said to the angel who brought destruction among the people, enough, now relax your hand. This was before David had sacrificed, before David had gone up to the threshing floor to offer this sacrifice. This had already been halted. And so what I was saying last time is that God was responding to his prayer that he had prayed at the beginning when Gad had come, which is, let me fall into the hands of Yahweh. But one of the interesting things about the Bible is that these stories repeat. You have Chronicles. Now, Samuel, the scholars tend to say that Samuel was written before the exile, and Chronicles is written after they have come back from Babylon. And so you get these different theological directions. So Chronicles tends to present theologically the reasons why they were driven into exile, in hopes that the people will pay attention, that we do not want to repeat the sins of our fathers. We want to stay loyal to God. And so it is going to tell the story slightly differently to call your attention to what it was that they were doing, which was rejecting God's rule and pursuing their own desires, pursuing gods that will give them what they want, instead of finding life in Yahweh. And so if we start here in 1 Chronicles 21:23, but King David said to Ornan, no, for I will certainly buy it at full value. Indeed, I will not take what is yours for Yahweh and offer burnt offerings for nothing. So David gave to Ornan 600 shekels of gold by weight for the place. Then David built an altar there to Yahweh, and he offered burnt offerings and peace offerings, and he called to Yahweh, and Yahweh answered him from the fire, and he answered him with fire from heaven upon the altar of the burnt offering. And so then this is an interesting question for you here. Where in the Bible did God bring fire down from heaven to consume sacrifice? You have this one here, and then you also have Elijah on Mount Carmel with the prophets Baal. And so then you could say, besides Elijah, where did God send fire down to consume a sacrifice? This one is an interesting one to remember here, that God sent it down, which means that God has accepted this sacrifice. Why? Because this is saying that God has eaten the meal with David. Then Yahweh commanded the angel, and he returned his sword to the sheath. See, when you have a fellowship offering, also known as a peace offering, you eat this meal with this other entity, and it is agreed upon in the ancient Middle Eastern culture that if you eat a meal with someone, then you were at peace with them. And if it was between two kings, then it would say that it's similar to like a peace treaty, which then could also imply that if somebody else were to attack this person, then you would come to their defense because you have eaten this meal with them. And so then it was very careful. You would not eat food given to you by a stranger, because then that would say that you were at peace with them and you wanted to have all of your options on the table, essentially, which might be that we may need to attack you. We don't want to go into peace with you without knowing who you are, that type of thing. And so God, having sent this fire down to consume this sacrifice, is saying that God has accepted this. Not only this, but if we read this, it was God who sent Gad to David and told him to come offer this sacrifice at the threshing floor at the top of the mountain, which would then eventually become the Temple Mount. That God was initiating this. That God said to David, I want to restore you into fellowship. Come eat this meal with me. And the fellowship offering is a meal that you eat with God. That this is also not, it's called a peace offering, a fellowship offering, a celebration offering. There's all of these different terms that get applied to it in English because it's a difficult offering to apply one meaning to, because it does so much work, which is restoration into fellowship. Fellowship is the primary way in which the ancient Near Eastern culture would talk about relationship, because it's not just my relationship with you, but it's fellowship. Think of like Lord of the Rings, the fellowship of the ring, that it's a fellowship of people, which is the reason why in 1 John we are told that John is telling us these things so that our fellowship might be with him and with God and with other believers. That to be Christian is to fellowship with God and other believers. It's not a relationship. That doesn't exist. It's not me personally, but it's my fellowship with God and fellow believers. That is the type of relationship that God is expecting us to have. And so then this is one of the reasons why it's called a fellowship offering, because the offering is to be eaten with other people. You're not supposed to leave the offering. Depending on the type of fellowship offering, you have a day or 3 days to be able to eat the entire meal. And if you do not eat the entire meal, then it is to be burned, which means you are to invite enough people to be able to consume the meal in one setting, 2 days basically. And so this is not between you and God, but this is between you and the people of God. And so God is the one who initiated this and said to David, bring this sacrifice in. And then God said, this sacrifice is accepted. And he put away the sword. What is it that we are to think here when it says put away the sword? Because here it says that he has stopped the plague, but the plague has already been stopped. And so you have to remember that the two different accounts are trying to tell you the same story slightly differently and point you to different types of ideas. And in this case here, it says he put away the sword. The plague had already been stopped, but he put away the sword. Well, let's keep reading here. Down here, 29. Now the tabernacle of Yahweh that Moses had made in the desert and the altar of the burnt offering were at the time at the high place of Gibeon. But David was not able to go before it to seek God, for he was afraid on account of the sword of the angel of Yahweh. Where do we see an angel with a sword guarding the entrance to something else in the Bible? We see that in Genesis. And Yahweh God sent him out of the Garden of Eden to till the ground from which he was taken. So he drove the man out and placed a cherubim east of the Garden of Eden and a flaming, turning sword to guard the way to the tree of life. This sword here is very much like the sword and the angel who is guarding the entrance to the Garden of Eden. Why do I say this? Well, if we take a look at this commentary here, the book of Genesis, it says here, the expulsion of man from the garden is not an ad hoc arrangement. This is not an impulse. This was something that God has said. He said, the day that you eat it, you shall surely die. To be exiled is conceptually the same thing as to die in the ancient Near Eastern mindset. Something is done which cannot be undone, at least not immediately. God stations the cherubim and the fiery whirling sword east of the Garden of Eden to prevent re-entry to the garden, as if re-entry into the garden is only through an opening on east side, much as the entrance into the tabernacle or temple complex was by a gate on the eastern side. In such a capacity, the cherubim functions much like the later Levites, who are posted as guards around the tabernacle and who are to strike down any person who encroaches upon the forbidden sancta. David could not approach the tabernacle because he was afraid of the angel with the sword. Just like Adam and Eve were not allowed to enter into the garden because of the flaming sword, the angel with the flaming sword. But when David eats the meal with God, God then tells the angel to put the sword away. That the fellowship with God, full fellowship, has been restored to what it was before. Why the difference between Adam and Eve and David? Because David cried out at the beginning when he realized that he had sinned against God. And then let's see right here, verse 8. Then David said to God, I have sinned severely in that I have done this thing. But now please forgive the sin of your servant, for I have been very foolish. Adam and Eve, they did not ask for forgiveness. Adam blamed God. Adam said, the woman you gave me, and Eve blamed the serpent. But David asked for forgiveness. So David was chastised by God, and then God said, come eat this meal with me. And then God told the angel to put the sword away. What were cherubs? They were angelic sentries. The cherubim in the Bible seems to be a class of angels that are composite in appearance. Their main task seems to be guarding, or another way to be able to talk about it in other places that I've heard, they are throne guardians. They are to guard against the encroachment of sin to God's throne, which is the reason why the Levites are set up as guards to the temple, because they are not to allow sin to encroach upon the entrance of God. Their main task seems to be guarding. Here, they guard the way to the tree of life. Is the fellowship offering. If we come here to the message of Leviticus commentary, Free to be Holy, on page 58, we are told that this offering led to the worshipers enjoying a feast of the parts that remained as an act of celebration for God's goodness. See, they were supposed to eat it, and they're supposed to eat it in the course of a day or 3 days, depending on the type of offering that you were doing. It is difficult to know as a celebration offering, which is the reason why I have it highlighted there in red, that this offering is an offering that you share together. It is to build fellowship, which is the reason why a lot of the places will call it a fellowship offering. This is to bring peace between you and God, that you eat a meal with God in his presence, that you come before him because he is your God and you are his people. But there are so many different ways in which the peace offering, fellowship offering is conceptually understood, so much so that this fellowship offering begins to extend to other sacrifices, one of which is the Passover. If we take a look here at a New Dictionary of Biblical Theology, page 757, the peace/fellowship offering is like the Passover, a sacrifice in which lay worshipers are allowed to share in the sacred meal, normally a priestly privilege. And so the fellowship offering, though, is one of the ways in which they are to eat it. The sin offering, the priest is to eat that, whereas the person bringing the sacrifice doesn't eat it, because you are not supposed to benefit from your own sin, type of a thing. But you bring it, and then the priest eats it, letting you know, very similarly to this way that David, where God ate the meal, and David ate it, saying that your sin, restoration has happened, that God accepts this, and that you are at peace with God. The priest eats the sin offering so that you know that your offering has been accepted and you have peace with God. And so normally this is a priestly activity, but in the fellowship offering, you get to eat it. Likewise, conceptually, the Passover is linked very closely to the fellowship offering. Now let's come back here. Nor do they just share the food of priests. They share the food of God. That the fellowship offering is food that you share with God. But the Passover, you know that this is God's food. The tabernacle and temple symbolize the court of a king. Indeed, the same word in Hebrew is used for the temple and palace. The altar of burnt offering is the king's table. So there's this conceptual link between fellowship offering and Passover, that there's a lot of similarities there. We're never told that the Passover is a fellowship offering, but it shares so many similarities that a lot of times when you have a Passover or you have a fellowship offering, that there are going to be conceptual overlaps theologically that connect things together for you. So much so that another commentator in Dictionary of the New Testament Use of the Old Testament says that Jesus as our Passover sacrifice. The Passover sacrifice is not among the 5 major kinds of sacrifices or offerings in Leviticus, but it is instituted in Exodus as part of the Exodus from Egypt. It was a kind of peace offering, or a kind of peace offering sacrifice, since the people ate the meat of the lamb. So you get these conceptual links between Passover and fellowship offering. Likewise, there is another story where you have conceptual links between the fellowship offering, even though it's not a fellowship offering, but it's there for you to have in the story so that you can understand. And that is the story of the prodigal son. And so the prodigal son has taken his money and he has wasted it. And now he's in the foreign land and he has hired himself out and he's with the pigs. The pigs are the sign of uncleanness. And he is thinking about eating the food that the pigs eat. And he has got to reek of pig feces. When I was in Alaska, I had to give these little piglets this shots to, because they were growing up. And when I stabbed that needle in them to give them shots, it was just projectile feces. And it ended up on my leg because I wasn't paying attention. I hadn't done it before. And I could not get the smell out of my pants. It reeked so bad. So the prodigal son had to reek of pig. And so he comes back to the father, and the father hugs him anyway. And so let's read this down here in 15. And he went out, and he hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, and he sent him into the fields to tend the pigs. And he was longing to fill his stomach with the carrot pods that the pigs were eating, and no one was giving him anything to him. But when he came to himself, or came to his senses, some of the translations say, he said that he's going to return to his father and become a hired hand. And so while he was a long ways off down here, while he was still a long way away, his father saw him and had compassion on him and ran to embrace him and kissed him. And his son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But his father said to his slaves, quickly, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and bring the fattened calf. Kill it, and let us eat it and celebrate, because this son of mine was dead and he is alive. This is conceptually a fellowship offering, or a peace offering or a celebration offering. It is not done at the temple, but that idea of restoration into fellowship is applied to this meal, that you have become restored fully. You are truly my son. And this is what is happening when God has consumed the sacrifice on the mountain, on the what would become the Temple Mount. He is saying to David, I have fully restored you as my son, because the king is considered a son of God. Take a look at Psalm chapter 2. He says, you are fully my son, just as the prodigal son has returned, and the father has ran out to him and brought him back in and threw him a feast. It was God who pursued David and said, come have this sacred meal with me, this fellowship meal. This is not a sin offering. This is God initiating and calling David to himself. Why? Because David cried out to him and said, I have sinned against you. What Adam and Eve did not do, David did do. And so God said, let's come, let's eat. And the angel put away his sword.